Good morning and happy Friday. Ooh, a little bit slow this morning, getting up and getting myself ready here, but we are here and are ready to see what kind of levels we have. One thing I do want to check before we just start the day is just make sure we don't have any crazy data or anything like that posting. We really don't. I think next week will be a little bit more exciting, kind of like we said yesterday. After the government shutdown ended, I'm thinking we're going to be getting quite a bit of data posting next week. Um, I would say like a little bit more than normal, like than what would be scheduled. So I'll be keeping a really close eye out on like what could potentially be coming out because of missed data over the past month, or maybe like, groups of data. But as of today, we don't really have anything. So that's good. We've had a very, very, very bearish overnight session in the ES. Let's go look at that real quick. Um, been I was laughing because last night, I think it was Goose who was like, "Oh, where's the top of my box? Oh, top of my box just left." Anyway, Goose was like, "Oh, we're having a really stagnant night on ES." And I feel like right when he said that, ES was like, "All right, bet we'll drop for potentially 100 points." So, we're down here at 66.82 trading right now. I'm imagining we are going to be looking for some pretty large bounce areas, as we're probably going to be pretty overextended on our wave one daily. So let's go look at ES and try to see if we can have any good opportunity. We've had a pretty big push down. We're outside of our Ivy walls this morning, and so we're in, I would say, potential for an outlier day. And so we want to be very, very picky with any sort of bounces we take today, and then really keep an eye on our vector to see how the trend is moving on our vector cluster, and if there's opportunity for potential continuation by using vector. Oh, Kunal-san. Okay, you said PCE and inflation are out on November 26th. Okay, thanks. Wow, that's actually really far away. That's crazy. Like over 10 days away, but that's cool. That's good to know that we have that though. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our Wave 1 daily here. Our vector on the Wave 1 daily is currently trading at probably low of day. 66.80. So yeah, that's about where we're with our low of day. Of course, we have the open state that we are currently creating because we keep making lower lows on this. Look at how overextended, guys, the wave one daily is. It's been a while since we've been this close to our 10% odds. Almost over 2 weeks ago, I think was the last time we were here. Um, the one thing I do want to note though is if we do go into our options analyzer, the odds for like another lower low kind of going in after this is relatively low, but it's actually like not that low, all things considered. We've just had two incredibly bearish days, one after the other. So the options analyzer may not give us clarity for potential reversal, but the other thing is just the simple fact that we are really, really close to our 10% odds. The other thing I really like is we have a 5% odds all the way down here at 66.11 or 66.12. That I would say is a pretty big stretch to get to today, especially considering we're already down 100 points. We're down just a little bit over 1% today on ES. Anything's possible, right? We could potentially get down there. Um, hey Kay, good morning. Yes, we do this every morning, Monday through Friday. Occasionally I'll go on Top Step TV and do morning market prep with the Top Step TV team. But if I'm not on Top Step, we will be doing it here in the Ascend channel. Um, but yeah, one thing to say is we're just a little bit over 1% down on the day. So to get ourselves down, I would say like another 60 or 70 points seems pretty crazy, but this would be a fantastic place to attempt bounces down at 66.11. But what I want to do now though is go to our lower time frames and just make sure that maybe we have some levels in between, maybe around the 66.40, which is the 10% odds, or some potential for vector. So let's go into our 7 wave 60 minute. And if you guys were actually in A Train's yellow box, yellow box charting session that he had last week. So the 7 wave 60, 50 days to load, this is actually the same chart that we use to chart our yellow box. So instead of just looking at options analyzer, we're just looking at the actual chart. Okay, so the 7 wave 60, we have our vector at the 67.12.88, maybe 67.13. So we have a little bit of room up before we hit that zone. You know what I'm imagining? I bet you right now our vector cluster is going to be really, really wide. this morning because we've had such a strong trend down. One of the things I do really like looking at the 7 wave 60, there's a couple things here that we should look at. So, first off, starting at 10 o'clock last night, so last night at 10 o'clock, we broke below pivot, broke below vector. We had this really strong candle that ended up breaking us below our vector. And while we had vector act as consolidation for about 3 hours during that time, by the time we actually broke below vector, we see a really clean trend of downward movement on vector. And further, we see price respecting our 7 wave 60 vector pretty well during our ETH session. See, we broke it, came below it, tested it up here, broke it. That next hour, we tried to test it again with a really weak candle at 67.53, and then just continued to see vector move down to 67.38 with that continual break and push down. So I like seeing that on a little bit more of a macro time frame that our vector was pretty respected during this strong move down. That's obviously a really clean trend. You can see that on the linear chart. It's a really clean trend on the linear chart. The other thing that I think is worth noticing on the 7 wave 60, though, beyond how vector was respected, is that one, we don't have any open states here. Look at this. We have a double bottom here that we did close. This was yesterday, I believe we closed this open state. But beyond being at this 10% odds and having this open state at 66.80 that we are currently forming, we have a lot of room down before we hit our next open state at 65.22. And that one's pretty old. Look at that. That one's really old. Where was that one formed? Look at that. This was formed all the way back on October 12th, so almost a month ago. Um, the one thing I'll say though, we're overextended on 7 wave 60, right? We have our 10% odds at 66.78, and then our 5% odds at 66.58. So potentially there could be some opportunity for like a bounce over here. Um, but let's keep looking, right? 66.58, just to have this one level, this one little resistive cluster is not enough confluence for me to want to take a bounce. So vector at 67.13, 66.58 and a half is a potential resistive area. So 20 wave 15, same story, right? Pretty overextended. We are seeing this open state that we have recently formed at 66.78. So I'm going to pretty much ignore that one, right? Because it's recent. If we keep making lower lows, that open state's going to continually change. 67.14 is where this current vector is, which I'm pretty sure is the exact same location. Go back. 67.11 on the 7 wave 60. Okay, so 67.11 is 67.14 currently where we're tracking. Here we go. That just revised down. Look to 67.12. So 11 to 12 is where we're seeing our current vector cluster, which is good. Similar to the 7 wave 60, we actually did see that our vector had a really nice clean trend and our price respected this vector for the most part, right? Same time here at around 9:30, 10 o'clock was when we had that break below our pivot on the 20 wave 15. Started to see weakness here, attempted to break back above this, but had a really, really respected rejection point all the way down as we started forming this large trend. So this could say that if we wanted to look for continuation down, we could potentially look to these vector cluster this morning to see if we have any opportunity for rejections. I know we talked about 66.58 on the 7 wave 60. We have 66.64. So it's about a 6 point range and a 5% odds there. The one thing I want to notice though on the 20 wave 15 is there's not a lot of additional resistance, especially after the 66.64. Um, we have this one little cluster here, but if we would break past the 64 level, we have room down all the way down to 66.32. So another 30 points down before we do hit that 2% odds on the 20 wave 15. We really don't have any open states. I could try to probably load a few more days, but yeah, look at that. We have not a lot of resistance down here, especially after that 66.32. So 64, 58 to 64 is starting to form a little bit of gray box resistance, but I'm not super confident in it yet. I do like our location of vector cluster though. So let's keep looking at some smaller time frames here. So here's our 10 wave 15 minute. This is a little bit of a lower time frame, and you can kind of see that, right? Because our vector cluster is a lot lower. Our vector location on the 10 wave is a lot lower. So the 7 wave 60 and the on the 20 wave, we're around like 66.12. We're already down here about another 13 points. So vector cluster is really, really wide this morning, which makes sense, right? If our vector cluster is going to track trend, it's going to be a little bit more agile when we look at those time frames that are judging like a lower time frame, for example, right? So our 7 wave 5 minute and our 50 wave 1 minute, our vector cluster is usually going to be a little bit closer to where price is currently trading compared to like um, the wave one daily, for example, or the 7 wave 60 minute. Because every hour you're getting a new candle and a new vector location, whereas on the 50 wave one, you're getting a new vector location on our 1 minute. So, because of this really strong trend, we are going to see a pretty wide vector cluster. And so we can map that out to kind of see where it is. But obviously, having a 15-point stop loss for a short when you're this overextended to the downside is really bad risk management practices. So one of the things that we can maybe look at is like where a smart area for potentially looking for a rejection would be. But the 10-wave 15, similar, right? We have this open state that we have recently formed. So I'm not going to be paying attention to it. We don't have any other open states. Oh my God. We just like don't have open states, which is crazy. We can kind of look to our low percentage of continuation, right? We have these three resistive clusters here. Um, 66, 58, 66, 68, 47. These are all actually pretty close to each other. One of the things I do like is this 58 was in confluence with the 20 wave. The 68 was close to that 64 level we saw on the 7 wave 60, but then all of a sudden now our resistive zone is getting pretty dense. So I'm hoping we'll find some clarity on the 7 wave 5 minute and then the 50 wave 1 minute to see if like 58 to 64 is going to be our level or 64 to 68 is going to be our level. So we'll see what we get. Hey, good morning, Wakey. Happy Friday. You are dedicated as always. I know you're making a bag this week. Um, 66. Wow, look at this. Here we go. So this is what I like to see. 7 wave 5 minute. And now we're in our lower time frames, right? And this is good. 7 wave 5 minute actually had a brief moment where it revised above pivot, which means it did start a bullish wave, which is kind of funny to think about because if you look at a linear chart, we have been very bearish, right? Because we're looking at these 5 minute candles, we did have that little pullback. What was that? I think this was at 8:10 in the morning. We did have this pullback. It's about probably like an hour ago or something like that. And so with that aggressive pullback, the 7 wave 5 minute was like, oh my God, maybe we're going up. So we had this break above pivot, but pretty shortly after, right below pivot, below vector. You can kind of see too on the 7 wave 5 minute that vector isn't quite as cleanly as respected in general. You can see obviously from this move down, this is about at five in the morning. We had a pretty decent respect of vector. We have a couple of attempts of breaking above, but continuing bearish momentum all the way past our 2% odds. Um, but I do like that this new wave formed because look, we created an open state with a revised number because we moved back above pivot all the way down at 66.35, which is really, really low. Um, who knows if we're going to get there? But the other thing I like is that we do have a level at 66.54, which is a little bit lower than the zone we were looking at, which is unfortunate because so far I think we've seen a potential resistive zone all the way up to 66.68 down to 66.54. So again, the vector cluster is pretty huge. And then our resistive zone we're seeing is also pretty huge. So we'll keep looking at the 50 wave 1 minute and try to decide if we want to make some zones. But I'm wondering if we might end up how we ended up on Wednesday this week, I think, where we actually didn't mark anything on our chart because we had our zones really, really big. Um, the good news is, though, I'm just happy to see that the 7 wave 5 minute did create an open state because it completed this short wave. So remember, guys, every time an open state is formed, it's basically at the apex of the wave. So you can see visually here, right? This is a long wave. At the very tippy top of this long wave, we created an open state. We revised back down into a short wave, created an open state that has since been closed, made a long wave, formed an open state, made this really big short wave, formed another open state, long wave, open state. So that's kind of how those open states are formed. 6684 is that current vector cluster. So we are currently trading just slightly above it. I bet if I click this again, it'll revise. There we go, 6686. So we're trading slightly above that vector cluster, which would indicate a little bit of bullish momentum on the 7-way 5-minute. But remember, a lot of our bigger time frames are posting their vectors significantly higher. And so we're still quite bearish, but the 7-way 5-minute is currently breaking above, which is interesting to see. So, okay. Not a lot of clarity though on these low percent probabilities of continuation just because that zone is so large. So let's go look at our 50 wave 1 minute to see what we can get. Okay, so we tapped our 2% odds on the 50 wave 1 minute, and this vector cluster is currently trading at 66.89, which is pretty close to where price is currently trading. You can see the 50 wave 1 minute, it's just a little bit messier. And that's because, right, the 1 minute is like it's just going to be really agile, right? You can kind of see that we were making open states back at midnight at high of days. We were making them at 4 a.m. We were making long waves. Whereas, like, if you go back and actually look at the linear chart, it's like, how the heck was that making a long wave? Because we've had such a bearish trend. But that just kind of does illustrate how tiny this time frame is. One of the things I want to notice though is similar with all of our other time frames, the 50 wave 1 minute has been respecting vector pretty well in this past, I would say hour or two. So that's good to see. The one thing I do really like though is we do have an open state down here at 66.61. It's a really old open state on the 50 wave 1 minute. We created it back yesterday evening. So this was the 13th at almost at midnight. So we did create an open state at midnight at 66.61, which is also the 1% odds on the 50 big 1 minute. So I do like seeing that, right? Because we didn't see any open states on anything else unless we were looking really, really far down. So let's go back through all of our charts real quick and see how we want to map out this this supportive area to the downside. So we have our 50 wave 1 minute at 66.61. Let me just mark that real quick. So 66.61, because we're gonna have a lot of lines here, guys. I think it was at 61 flat. It's 61.60. So let's do 61.75. Okay, so we'll do that. I'm just gonna make a note here. This is our 50 wave open state and 1% odds. So guys, usually like if like we just saw, for example, the 50 wave 1 open state and a 1% odds, this is nothing that I would be like trading off of just based off of this one time frame. And that's simply because um it's such a low time frame. And if we're not seeing any sort of like resonant support across other time frames, that is never going to be enough confidence for me to want to take like a high probability bounce. Now, is there opportunity potentially for like a scalp or something if you guys are playing more of the scalping game? Absolutely, right? But for me, like I ideally would like to get larger moves. So I want to see some sort of like resonant support across different frames. So let's go back to our 7-way 5 minute because we had this 64 level. So I'm going to put the 10% odds at 64.82, basically 65. Let me just copy this and paste it up. Here's 6, let's just do 65. So that's our 7-way 5 minute 10% odds. Let's look at the 10 wave. We had 58 and 68. We can mark both of these, but that makes the zone so big. It makes the zone so big. I'm gonna mark the 58 zone. It makes the zone really big. So this one's like a little bit, I say we can be like a little bit artsy on this one. We do 68, 58, 25. Let me move that out of the way. We might mark this 68, but it's just like you start doing that and then you start like justifying marking like, a 66, 70 and a 72. And then you start marking every single zone. So I'm going to keep that 68 one out just because the 2% odds is like a little bit nicer and it keeps that grouping just a little bit closer. And we can also see like 58, I think was our lowest level. There might have been a 54, but what I really want to look for is like a last line of defense, right? And so if we start entering really, really high and our last line of defense is 10 points away, that's like not something that I love to see because then, of course, our risk to reward could potentially be lower, or we're going to be, hoping and praying for a 20-point bounce just because we have a 10-point stop loss. So um, we'll do 58 because that'll be kind of marked a little bit more as our last line of defense. So here we go. We have this 5% odds at 64.63. So we'll do another one at 64. This is gonna get messy, which is good though. I want to see this thing get messy because that means we're getting a lot of resistance in that area. Okay, so that's a 5% odds on the 20 wave. Let's just go look at the 7 wave 60 again. We have 58.20, which is great because that's pretty well in line with this 58, like 58.50 that we saw in our other time frame. So we'll put one more just a little bit below that. I do like 58, 58.25. And then let's go look at our wave one daily. I think we might have had something on our wave one daily. Oh, 60? No, we actually didn't. We have this 42, which is pretty far away from the zone that we're looking at. Okay. So here's the zone we're looking at. It's going to be 66.58, I would say 25 to basically 65.25. So it's still a pretty big zone. It's a 7-point zone, but one of the things that I'm okay with about this zone is that if we do get down here, this is like last line of defense for like pretty much every single time frame, right? Like we'd be so overextended, especially on our bigger time frames, that this is going to give me like a pretty like high confidence to want to bounce this area. And honestly, then anything after this trade, I would be completely hands off because it's like, okay, we're outside of our IV walls, we're outside of our like 2% odds on most of our time frames. Like it would just be like everything would be indicating no, 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 no for trying to do any other bounces. And especially too, guys, like it's Friday, right? We've had a pretty good week. Price action was pretty good this week. And so I'm not going to be sitting here like trying to take every little setup. Like I'll probably try to take one or two trades, spend maybe an hour at the charts at New York Session Open, but then go enjoy my weekend, right? Especially too, like don't feel like you guys need to scrap for potential plays. If you guys, maybe we're short in ETH, maybe don't even trade this morning, right? So just yeah, make sure that like you're feeling good, you're feeling fresh and ready because we've had a really good week of a lot of really good opportunity, which could also bring a little bit of fatigue, right? Especially as we hit Friday. So um, let's just go track real quick before we wrap up for the day where our vector cluster is currently sitting. So our wave one daily is 66.94. Our 7 wave 60 is 67.17. So this one's probably going to be our highest. Let me go mark our wave one daily real quick. So 67.17. Actually, it's like 17.75. 20 wave 15 is 13.25. 14, 13.25. And then 10 wave 15 is 66.97.50. So really, really low. That's actually pretty well in line with our wave one daily. 7 wave 5 minute is 66.87. Wow, that's really low. Okay. Did we look at the 20 wave? Let me go look at the 20 wave again. Yeah, that's 67.13. Okay, cool. 7 wave 5 minute is 66.87. Look, 7 wave 5 minute started making a bullish candle. That's good to see. And then the 50 wave 1 minute is probably also making, no, it's on its way up though, 66.87. So we're actually above Vector on a pretty decent amount of our time frames. I would say our last line of defense with Vector though is going to be that 7 wave 60 in that 20 wave 15 at 67.13.25 to 67.17.50. I think is where we would be looking at like last line of defense before we start like really working towards another bullish wave cycle, especially on some of our larger time frames. So vector cluster right now is pretty messy just because it's so big. I think trying to identify a entry is a little bit difficult. There's opportunity to attempt at kind of where the 7 wave 60 vector location is just because it is the last line of defense. Um, you're technically in vector cluster because some of those lower time frames were trading at like 66.87. But I mean, that's crazy, right? To enter at 6,700 with a stop above 67.17 is crazy. So, just some things to keep in mind. The other things to keep in mind, guys, is as we get into market open, of course, there's potential for these levels to revise based on increased volatility, and vector will always be adjusting. So just because we marked our vector currently doesn't mean this is where where vector is going to be all day. So we will be continuing to watch those in Ascend as we live trade this morning. But otherwise, guys, um, that's kind of all we have today. George, I would say I've been studying timeframes on respect. I actually really do like the 7 wave 60, but the problem is with the 7 wave 60, a lot of times we actually don't hit like low percentage probabilities of continuation or things like that. But if we are looking at vector cluster, I do like treating the 7 wave 60 kind of as like a last line of defense, just because it's like a larger time frame structure. But in terms of trade entry, the 7 wave 60 doesn't really work all the time, just because if we're moving in like smaller time frames and things like that, like we may not ever even hit 7 wave 60. But the fact I would say that on fractals, we're so overextended on our 7 wave 60 gives me like a pretty decent confidence for this like 58 to 65 level. So we'll see what we can get, guys. But otherwise, Tay, my average risk to reward is usually 3 to 1 is what I really try to push for. Anything below that, I'll still take a trade, like if it's 2 to 1, but anything under 2 to 1, like I do not want to be taking a trade, just because I'm pretty risk averse. I'm like the most boring risk averse trader you've ever seen. But yeah, guys, that's a really good point. Kay, we are going to be doing a trade management workshop here in 2 weeks. So this Sunday, our workshop is going to be based on how to find and trade vector clusters. So there's actually going to be a lot of education on like, I know we go through finding vector cluster, but we're going to be talking about like the mechanics of it and like how myself and Goose do identifier setups with vector cluster this week. Next week, we're going to be talking about the mechanics of gray box and that setup, which is essentially what we found today, right? So, like, this is our gray box setup for the day. And so we'll be talking about that in 2 weeks. And then in 3 weeks, our workshop will be about trade management and position management. So, hoping that we can kind of build a really good body of knowledge for education, especially on like how myself and the other admins in Ascend trade. So, looking forward to that, guys. But happy Friday. We got a couple levels here that I think look pretty good. So if you guys are in our Ascend Premium, I will see you for live voice here in 15 minutes. But otherwise, everybody have a fantastic weekend and please trade safe today, guys. See ya.